I had just plopped down on the couch, the TV humming softly in the background, filling the silence of my empty living room. My parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house. At first, I was excited about having the whole place to myself, but as the evening dragged on, an uneasy feeling started to settle in. It was around 10 p.m. when I first noticed something strange. A faint creak echoed from upstairs. I told myself it was just the house settling, trying to focus on the show I was watching. But the noise didn't stop. It was slow, almost like someone walking carefully, trying not to be heard. I muted the TV, my ears straining to catch every sound. The creaking continued, moving from one side of the hallway to the other. My heart began to race, a tight feeling of fear building in my chest. I knew this house inside out, every noise it made, and this wasn't normal. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just imagining things. I turned the TV back up, hoping to drown out the worry gnawing at me. But then, the sound changed. The footsteps had stopped, replaced by a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged across the floor. I couldn't brush it off any longer. My heart pounded as I stood up, trying to stay calm. My first thought was to grab something to defend myself, so I reached for the heavy flashlight in the kitchen drawer. I walked over to the stairs, staring up into the darkness. The house was old, and the stairs creaked loudly as I climbed. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was walking into something I shouldn't. When I reached the top, I paused, listening. Nothing. I slowly moved down the hallway, checking each room. Everything was exactly where it should be. But the fear was still there, gnawing at me. I shook my head, feeling a bit stupid, and turned back toward the stairs. That's when I saw the attic door was slightly open. I hadn't been up there in years. The ladder was dusty, and the door had always been stuck. I stared at it, gripping the flashlight tightly. The door was open just enough to notice, and my mind raced with all the scary possibilities. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the ladder down. It creaked loudly, sending chills down my spine. I hesitated, staring up into the dark attic, my hand shaking as I pointed the flashlight into the darkness. I climbed up slowly, each step feeling like it could be my last. The attic was cold and smelled musty, filled with old boxes and things we didn't use anymore. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, showing me the familiar clutter. And then I saw it. In the far corner, something had been moved. A large trunk that had always been there was now slightly open, the lid tilted just enough to show what was inside. I walked toward it cautiously, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think straight. When I reached the trunk, I took a deep breath and opened it fully. It was empty. The only thing in there was a small, crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it, my hands shaking. The handwriting was messy, like someone had written it quickly, but I could still read the words. "He's been hiding here. Don't tell anyone." I froze, the realization hitting me hard. Someone had been living in our attic. Maybe they were still here. I backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I knew I had to get out, call the police, get help. But as I turned to leave, I heard a sound behind me, a soft movement, almost impossible to hear. I spun around, the flashlight beam shaking, but I saw nothing. The attic looked just as it had a moment ago. Except now, the trunk was closed. I didn't wait to find out what had closed it. I ran down the ladder, nearly tripping in my rush. I didn't stop running until I was outside, my lungs burning as I tried to catch my breath. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, barely able to explain what had happened. The police arrived quickly. They searched the house, the attic, every corner. But they found nothing, no one hiding, no sign that anyone had broken in. It was like the person had disappeared into thin air. They told me I was safe, that it was probably just a prank or my imagination. But I knew better. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. And now they were gone. But not without leaving a reminder. When I finally calmed down and went back inside, I found another note, this one sitting on the couch where I had been. "I'll be back." I never stayed home alone again. But every time I walked past the attic, I can't shake the feeling that someone's still up there, just waiting for the right moment. I work late shifts and usually get home around 1 a.m. The streets are always empty at that time, and the quiet of the neighborhood is oddly comforting. It feels like the world has gone to sleep, leaving me alone in my own little space. But that night, something felt off. As I got closer to my house, the streetlights seemed dimmer, and the shadows on the road looked longer and darker. My front door creaked louder than usual when I pushed it open, and the familiar smell of home wasn't there. Instead, there was a faint, strange smell in the air, like metal or something old. I tried to shake it off, thinking I was just tired from work. I locked the door behind me and checked it twice, a habit I had to make sure everything was safe before bed. My small one-bedroom house was quiet, like always. I turned on the living room light, dropped my keys on the table, and kicked off my shoes. The silence, which usually felt peaceful, started to feel heavy as I walked through the house. I decided to grab a quick snack before bed. While I was in the kitchen, spreading peanut butter on a slice of bread, I heard a faint creak above me. The house was old, so it sometimes made noises, but this sound was different. It was slow and steady, like someone was carefully walking. I froze, listening hard. The creaking stopped, and everything went quiet again. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But deep down, I felt uneasy. I forced myself to finish my snack, even though my stomach was tight with worry. I kept telling myself I was just tired and needed sleep. But as I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, the feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. I kept glancing around, expecting to see someone, but all I saw were shadows that seemed darker than usual. When I finally got to my bedroom, I shut the door quickly and locked it, something I didn't normally do but felt necessary that night. I changed into my pajamas, trying not to notice how my hands were shaking. Lying in bed, I pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My eyes kept darting to the door, half expecting it to creak open on its own. Minutes passed, and just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard the creaking again. This time, it was closer, right outside my bedroom door. My breath caught, and I lay completely still, trying to hear any other sounds. The doorknob rattled slightly, like someone was gently trying to open it. My heart was pounding, and I could barely breathe. I wanted to get up and check the door, but I was frozen in place. The doorknob rattled again, harder this time, and then silence. I waited, every muscle tense, but nothing happened. No more sounds. Just the heavy silence of the night. After what felt like hours, I finally gathered the courage to get out of bed. My feet touched the cold floor, and I slowly walked to the door. I pressed my ear against it, listening for any movement on the other side, but there was nothing, just the quiet of the night. I unlocked the door, my heart racing, and slowly opened it. The hallway was empty, just as I had left it. The house was still. I checked every room, every closet, and under every bed, but no one was there. The front door was still locked, the windows were shut tight. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that the noises were just the house settling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in the house. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on the couch with all the lights on, watching the front door until the sun came up. The next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. On the floor, just outside my bedroom door, was a small piece of paper that I hadn't seen in the dark. Written on it, in shaky handwriting that looked almost childlike, were the words, "I'll be back." I felt my stomach drop as I stared at the note. My mind raced with the possibilities. Had someone been in the house while I slept, just feet away from where I lay in bed? The idea sent a shiver down my spine. I moved out that same day, packed everything I could fit into my car, and left. But even after I was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I half expected to see someone standing there, waiting. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget about what had happened, but the note haunted me. It wasn't just the words. It was the idea that someone had been close enough to leave it. The fear followed me, no matter where I went. I started sleeping with the lights on, jumping at every little noise, unable to trust that I was ever truly alone. And then, one night, as I was getting ready for bed in my new place, I found another note, just like the first one, lying on my pillow. It simply said, "I found you." That's when I knew it wasn't over. I was alone that night, the kind of alone that gets under your skin and makes the quiet feel heavier. My parents were out of town, and I was in charge of the house. I told myself I wasn't scared. The house was old, with squeaky floors and the occasional cold breeze sneaking through the windows, but I was used to it. This was home. Around 10 p.m., I decided it was time to wind down. I made a snack, checked all the doors to make sure they were locked, and turned off most of the lights. I left the hallway light on, just enough to keep the dark from taking over completely. I sat down on the couch in the living room, scrolling through my phone. Every now and then, I looked up at the hallway, just to make sure the light was still there. Time passed, and I started getting sleepy. Just as I was about to go to bed, I heard something. A thud. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Something had moved upstairs. I froze, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe something fell. Maybe the house was just settling, like it always did. But then, it happened again. This time, I heard footsteps, slow, steady, and unmistakable. Someone was in the house. My heart started racing, and I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stayed glued to the couch, listening as the footsteps continued, moving from one room to the next. I tried to remember if I had locked my bedroom door, but the thoughts slipped away as the footsteps got louder, closer. Whoever it was, they were looking for something, or someone. The sound moved from the upstairs hallway to the top of the stairs. Then, the creaking started again, one step at a time, coming down. Panic took over. My mind raced with ideas, but nothing made sense. I knew I couldn't stay where I was, but running upstairs wasn't an option either. I could feel the footsteps getting closer, each one making the stairs creak. I slowly got up from the couch, trying not to make a sound. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a small lamp. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I backed up toward the kitchen, keeping my eyes on the staircase. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. The silence was deafening. My breathing was too loud. I strained to hear any movement, but there was nothing. Just as I was about to take another step back, the silence was broken by the sound of a door creaking open, the basement door. My stomach dropped. I had forgotten to check that door. I hadn't even thought about the basement. Whoever was in the house was heading down there now. I had two choices: run for it or try to lock them in the basement. My body moved before my brain could decide. I sprinted for the door, slamming it shut as hard as I could, and turned the lock. My hands were shaking so badly. I wasn't sure if I had locked it properly. I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my phone and bolted out the front door, not even looking back. I kept running until I was a few blocks away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I found a spot under a streetlight and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house thoroughly but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no one in the basement, no trace of anyone ever being there. But I knew what I heard. Someone had been in the house, looking, waiting. They told me it was probably just my imagination, that the old house was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, someone who had been so close, almost within reach. When my parents came back, I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't want them to worry. But I never stayed home alone again. Every time I think back to that night, I can still hear those footsteps, still feel that presence behind me, and I know it wasn't just in my head. Weeks went by, but the fear didn't leave me. One night, I was lying in bed, finally feeling like I could sleep again. Just as I started to drift off, I heard it, faint but clear. A thud, just like before. My blood ran cold. I knew then that whoever, or whatever it was, hadn't left. They were still out there, still waiting. And this time, I wasn't sure I'd be so lucky.